I've experienced a lot of rejection, and the times that have hurt the most and the jobs that where I've had to be watching buses go by with the poster of the person whose like life was changed, right? Like that happened to me a lot for a while, and that sucks. But if I'd gotten those jobs, there's some huge things I would have missed out on. There were other jobs that then changed my life in ways that were, when you sort of compare them, knowing what I know now, I'm like, oh, well, but I wouldn't have learned that thing that I learned from that job. And I wouldn't have met that person who then changed my life. I wouldn't have met that friend who then became one of my closest friends. Like sort of trying to like zoom out from it and be like, right, sometimes that makes the like rejection so much easier to swallow when you realize like it's part of a bigger tapestry.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Cristin Milioti is an actor. She sat down with me in cyberspace to talk about the work.
Do you have a typical entry point that you like to enter into discovering how to play a character?
No. You know, I actually like don't know how to talk about process. I'm sort of like loath to talk about it in one respect because I'm like, well, the less one knows about that, the better I am at my job.
Yes.
And also sometimes I think as an actor, like the less I am attached to one type of process, the better I am at my job. Like, I think like, I don't know, like I guess like, I guess the best answer I could give is that like I don't really have one process, and I'm always trying to like forget it if I even did, because I think the more open I am, the better I am. I don't know if that like answers it. So I don't know if I'm gonna like give you the answers that are helpful, because like it's something that I weirdly like try not to think about.
Yes. So even what you just said there brings up a question.
Sure.
Which is, what do you need then to not be panicked in the moment where you want to be open? You know, there has to be.
I think that's one of the hardest parts of acting, and so like wildly personal is like the mental gymnastics to sort of get out of your own way. Like something I try to think of, and maybe this is because like I started more in theater, but something I try to keep in mind sometimes is that like one of the things, like kind of all you can do is trust yourself and like trust in the sort of like mystical part of it all. Do you know what I mean? Like you can get the best people and the best script and the best director, and sometimes it doesn't work. There is something greater than all of you at play, and you just sort of have to trust. And I guess like the thing I try and tell myself in those moments, I guess, if I really have to think about it, is that like trust that you've done the work. Like I do a lot of prep and stuff for everything that I do. And yeah, that just like when you get there, like trust that you've thought about this enough and that you've done all the research and that you've thought about it in different ways, and then sort of like let go and let God, kind of. And sometimes you totally are terrible. Like you can think about that and you completely, you know, like duff a take, or you never get a scene, or, you know, you never get it to the point where you thought it should be. And then that's like a whole nother set of mental gymnastics to like not, you know, move to the bottom of the ocean. You know, I've worked with so many different types of actors. I work with actors who are word perfect and who stick to exactly what they've planned. I've worked with actors who don't believe in memorizing lines until right before because they think them like less inhibited. Like it's kind of dealer's choice. And like one thing I have learned over the years is that like it is important to keep a loose grip. That the harder you grip and the harder you try to control the outcome, it usually limits things that could come from you that you may not otherwise like be open to. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yes.
But also that's not to say to not stick to your guns. Those are like two separate things. That like I think you should always speak up if you have an idea and stick to what you think this person's life is, and what, you know, like I always feel very defensive of whoever I play, and I speak up for them, and I treat it like I'm in a biopic of this person that you've just never heard of, and like, or at least in terms of like taking care. And so there's a difference between like sticking to your guns and also like loosening your death grip, basically.
Yes.
But that's something I'm still like exploring.
I heard you talk about, and you mentioned the number 10, like there was 10 auditions for Once.
Yeah, it's something like that. Yeah. So
can you just talk to me about like numbers, like any of them from 5 or 6 on, like how does a human go into number 6 or number 7 and function? And then who are the people that survive, whoever had 8 and then we're told no?
It's the worst. It's one, I mean, God, there's so many terrible aspects of our industry, unfortunately. And there's also many, at the same time, like beautiful, unspeakably gorgeous aspects. But like, that's one, it's such an unfortunate intersection, because like as an actor, you're asked to come to something completely vulnerable and open-hearted and like raw. And then at the same time, so you're expected to like wear that hat and like have no exoskeleton protecting you from like the rejection that is so, how do you not take that personally? I mean, you know, Once was a bunch of auditions, but that still happens to me all the time. Like that never goes away. I tested for something, I don't know, like a year and a half ago. It was like 5 auditions and I didn't get it. Oh. And I was heartbroken, because also like, it's this weird dance of like, well, show us how you do it. So you start working on it and you get attached, because like, you can't not, you're a human being. And then when they tell you no, it's so hard to not take that as like, you know, that you don't have the talent, that you did it wrong, that if only you'd done this, 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 and this. And I think that part I've started to like let go of more, and sort of have faith that like all you can truly do. And this is something I have to remind myself 10,000 times. I'm like by no means sitting on a lotus flower telling you this. Like it can be a real nightmare, but like, you know, that you kind of have to, then it wasn't supposed to be your job. Mm-hmm. And I will say that the times that, I mean, this has happened to me so many times. I have been incredibly blessed in my career and incredibly privileged. And, you know, even so, I've experienced a lot of rejection, and the times that have hurt the most and the jobs where I've had to be, you know, watching buses go by with the poster of the person whose like life was changed, right? Like that happened to me a lot for a while, and that sucks. But if I'd gotten those jobs, there's some huge things I would have missed out on. There were other jobs that then changed my life in ways that were, when you sort of compare them, knowing what I know now, I'm like, oh, well, but I wouldn't have learned that thing that I learned from that job. And I wouldn't have met that person who then changed my life. I wouldn't have met that friend who then became one of my closest friends. Like sort of trying to like zoom out from it and be like, right. Sometimes that makes the like rejection so much easier to swallow when you realize like it's part of a bigger tapestry, I guess.
I watched the cell phone video of you singing "She Used to Be Mine."
Oh, wow.
I was crying because, well, here's why. I had on Nicolette Robinson, who took over that role. Yeah. At a certain point, I was there on her first night on Broadway.
Oh, wow.
I talked to her afterwards for the show, like a couple days later. And she told me what that song meant to her. She used to put on that soundtrack when her husband, Leslie Odom Jr., was like away and she was pregnant.
Yeah.
And she used to cry and have like, she opened up and said that was a really hard time. And so to think about how she had to nail that song with her own feelings about it, like I can't square that. Like I can't figure how professional you have to be, or how it's like another level of professionalism, because everybody's crying in the whole place, you know? It's not, so you're the only one not crying really, but she was the one that was crying, like listening to it. It's crazy. But in the same way, like you had a song in Once that everyone is waiting for throughout the show.
Sure.
Falling Slowly. And, I'm sure you didn't have a similar connection to it, but would that impede your way to perform it if you did? And then knowing that there's people in the audience that have those kind of connections to it, did that ever mess with your mind? I mean, you're doing this 8 times a week.
For sure. Oh, definitely. Sometimes. But like, what I think, first of all, thank you so much for that compliment about watching that cell phone video. I will say the difference between that is that like, when I sing those songs at the concerts that I do, whether it's like a cover of that song or a cover of like a Bon Iver song, I mean, embarrassingly or not, like I often start crying because it's me up there.
Right.
With something like Once, and I can't speak to, Nicolette's experience, but you have a character you're playing. And so it's sometimes easier. Like I would hear, of course I would hear people like tittering about like, oh, this is the song, this is the big song. Like, oh my God, this is it. That song also like played at so many weddings. But, it is very, I would of course get completely lost in it because it's very hard not to get completely lost in that music. It's so beautiful. But I also was so conscious of playing someone else, who's hearing it for the first time. And then I think there were other songs in that show that like destroyed me in ways that maybe the audience like wasn't fully aware of, or I hope they were, because that's definitely part of the show. But I think that like, that's the difference of playing a character performing something. There's like a slight, I don't want to say remove, because it's just as, at least in my experience, like just as visceral. But I think it's sometimes easier to like control your emotions, if that makes sense.
Yes.
You do it. I performed Once over 500 times,
Crazy.
And you go through so many phases. You go through a phase of like, feeling like you can lift a car, like it really becomes like second nature. Like you've done it so many times that you don't have to think about it. And then like really cool stuff starts happening. I've also gone through it where you've done it so many times that suddenly you forget if you just said the right line, and you can't remember like how to enter a song that you've sung 600 times. Like it is such a long run like that is really like a mental, it's crazy. It's like a marathon. So I don't know, but yeah, for sure. I would hear people every night, like the theater would get very quiet in anticipation for that song.
Can you talk about this thing that you claim started with Scorsese, that you started to take every single take as a different opportunity to do something different? And even a rehearsal, you said, was an opportunity to treat that as a take.
I definitely do try to do as many different takes as possible, because sometimes you find your way to things. I think it's a part of, as I was saying before, like the loosening of the death grip.
Yeah.
Of just like trying to throw as much at a wall as possible. Although sometimes that can really come back to bite you, because then sometimes like you're just so at the whim of an editor.
Yes.
That like the thing that you're trying to do, it's just a tricky balance of like I said earlier, like sticking to your guns and letting go. But like sometimes I found that like there have been certain projects where you throw so much at the wall, and then it maybe it's not as cohesive as you'd imagined, because it's someone else's interpretation of it. With film and television, you're also like, it's really what helps you let go and let God is that like at the end of the day, like you can't edit yourself. I've edited myself one time, and it was an incredibly validating experience because I was able to fine tune everything. Absolutely everything. And I was like, oh God, this would be amazing to sit and edit every single one of my performances. I would absolutely love this. It was exhausting, but just because also I can't watch myself or listen to myself. So it was like a true, being locked in a room with myself for 18 hours a day in like a windowless editing room was a real test. But I was able to like calibrate things in the way that I'd intended when I was on set. And that was like incredible, but it's so rare that you get that.
I guess, is it true? Like when you're editing, it's not quite the same experience as watching yourself on the screen, because that's done. You can't do anything about it. When you're in the editing room, you're able to, like, you can watch yourself for 24 hours, but you're not panicking because you can literally change things there.
Well, yeah. And you've now seen all the dailies, you've seen all the takes, and you're like, okay, so this scene is coming off. She's not quite in the emotional place that we need her to be. Like, I pushed her too far this way. Can we bring it back? Let me see those 3 takes where it was like slightly more vulnerable or slightly more thrown away. And like, oh, okay, so now I can pull that back to make the next scene pack more of a punch, because I'll use one of those takes where I like really went for it. Or like, that like, that's now too early in the arc. So I'm going to bring that back and I'm going to make something earlier, stronger. Like you can like fuck with the dials.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's like, awesome. I mean, it's very time consuming, but I do think that everyone should, especially actors, should like experience that at one point in their career of like being on the other side of things. It was such an immense learning experience. And to really see like I don't know. And this is how I feel like today, that kind of all you can do is like, as much work as you can, as much prep as you can, and then like leave it all on the dance floor. Like just, and then trust. And the trust thing is really hard, because you're like burying your soul. And then eventually, the person, you better hope you have a good director and a good editor, which is like a crazy thing to think about. Do you like Showgirls? You
mean the movie?
Yeah.
Oh man, I haven't seen that since it came out.
I've watched that film so many times.
Wow.
It's like my friends are all obsessed with it, and we get together a couple times a year and watch it.
Wow.
It's so that with each viewing of that movie, you start off being like, oh my God, it's so over the top and ridiculous, and like everything from it is like instantly quotable and memeable. But the more I've sat with it, the more, that movie like ruined Elizabeth Berkley's career.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's so fucked up, I mean, beside the fact that she was like 20 years old, is that like she is swinging for the fences. She's not doing anything differently than like what Christian Bale does. She's just like she's like, I've read interviews with her where she was like, the director and I agreed that my character had a crack addiction. And there like used to be more scenes in the movie where they talked about her addiction. They were all cut. So she's giving this performance of someone who's on crack, and it's never mentioned. And she was fucking run out of Hollywood. And like, say what you will about her performance, like she goes for it.
Yeah.
She didn't play a single thing safe, and she was forever punished for it. And I think that, and meanwhile that director like went on to direct, but he wasn't punished for
That's
it.
Right.
He was
That's
for
right.
a little bit, but then he was allowed to like keep going, and she was banished, from Hollywood. And it's so insane. And obviously that's like patriarchal and all that shit, but it's also like, yeah, she trusted. And that's, I don't think the lesson there is to not trust, but it's like, that's someone who was fucking going for it. Like with every cell of her body, whether or not her performance is for you or not, I don't know. But like with each time I watch it, I'm just like, God, we should be like commending her. She just is like going for broke. Like every single line is like, at 100. And that's what she was directed to do. And that's how she was edited. And she's not doing anything different than like what Nicolas Cage does.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, just like, I am gonna play with every single crayon in my crayon box, and I'm just gonna go for it. For the fact that like, yeah, it's scary. It's scary to trust.
Yeah. There was a little documentary that came out about Scorsese on the set of The Departed. I was shocked that just to see Scorsese all the time just sitting in front of the monitor, like not like almost like he seemed like miles away from DiCaprio. And was that the way it was on The Wolf of Wall Street? And in general, when people are just at Video Village, is that an issue for you? Are you an actor that likes to have the director close to the actual work and away from that monitor?
No, I've never thought about it in terms like that, because it's just so wildly different with everyone. But with Scorsese, like my memory of that is that he's like wildly collaborative, but he's very, very like, he lets you do your thing. He walks in and tells you if it's not working. That's what my memory is. And then also like with suggestions sometimes, but for the most part, he's very much like, I hired you, do your thing. Like that, I felt incredibly free on that shoot. Once I got over my own imposter syndrome, and once I got over like, I think that I spent my first couple days on that movie in such a blackout panic and like didn't go for it in the way that I then began to, when I realized that that's the type of set that is, like he's very much encourages like going for broke and is very loose with the script. Like it's very, very, the script is a guide, but like if you're feeling something, go for it. And I mean, my God, what a blessing. Yeah. I if anything, I just wish that I'd known that from day one and hadn't been so scared. Right. I would have done a lot differently. But like, I think that's also what makes working for him so incredible, is that like when you're trusted like that, there's nothing worse than being micromanaged. That's like, I really, in my own personal experience, when that's happened, I begin to shut down, because I just think that like my mind immediately begins to believe that I'm the weakest link and that there's something that I'm the one dragging everyone down. And then it's like, I can't, I don't know. And my mind already goes there anyway, at the start of any project, I'm like convinced I'm going to get fired and convinced that everyone thinks I'm bad. And like, that's already such a thing to like get over, that when you start to get micromanaged by someone, yeah, it's just like, no one likes it. So he's very, very free. And like, just kind of let you play a lot. Also, you have the luxury of, you're working with someone who's so incredible at what they do, and you have time. Like to this day, that like working on that movie, I've never, not since, experienced the amount of time you get to explore a scene. It's like unheard of. But that's what you get when you work with someone like that. He's earned that, and I wish that was the case with everything, but it's not, sadly.
I've heard Andy Samberg say that they really wanted you for Palm Springs. When you hear that, is there there's a certain amount of like relief, but is there a strange thing that I would never have known this would exist unless a few actors have talked about this. When they're offered roles. Yeah,
it's harder sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I shouldn't use the word harder. It's a blessing to be offered something like that. That's wild. But I will say that there is a certain amount of neuroses that does for sure come with that, where I'm like, but you don't know what I'm going to do. And like, what if you don't like what I do? For sure. That's like a huge, and I've experienced that. Although, I've experienced that even with things I've auditioned for, but at least with like things that you audition for, you can point to that and be like, but you know what I'm coming in with.
And you could also say like, it's your fault. You hired me. I showed you that.
Yeah. That you're like, what you're getting. Like, I showed you how I interpret this. And yes, for sure. There's like a huge, it ratchets up that imposter syndrome to like a 20 out of 10. Because you're just like, oh no, what if, you made a mistake.
Right. Right. I can't imagine this movie not being in my top 10 favorite movies of the year. Right. I really loved it.
Thank you.
But I almost shut it off.
Why?
I'll tell you the moment that I kept it on. And me and my wife watched it again to find out why that happened to both of us.
Oh my God.
There's stuff that has to happen here. It's almost like you have to watch it again to really enjoy those first couple scenes, because he's functioning in that world. But it just seemed to me like it was this goofy comedy for the sake of goofiness, like the way he's dancing in the beginning.
That misdirect is, when I read it, I felt the same way. Like when I was first reading it, I was like, what is this? Like, why? Is this like a fucking what is it? It's like two people meet at a wedding and like
Yes.
that's like what, oh God, we need another one of these. And then
Yes.
I believe we're on the same page about the moment, which I don't like to share because I like when people like discover that.
Yes.
I'm like it's hard to do press for this film because there's so much I don't want to share about it because of what you experienced watching it. But that when that moment arrives, it's like then you suddenly realize that you didn't know what you were in this whole time.
Exactly.
It's one of my favorite parts about it. I think that's like such a smart, it's so smart but you have to hang in there for like 10 minutes.
Yeah. And you know, I'm a very, very busy man. I'm on my couch and I really have other things to watch. So I can't watch a movie and give it a chance.
You have to sit through that first 10 minutes. And I also think that's what, like, if, you know, you can't, the rest of it doesn't work. That moment doesn't work if you don't have those first 10 minutes.
That's right. But I want to just pinpoint one thing though, because it was really the way you reacted to that moment.
Yeah.
and I actually said out loud to my wife, that's the way I want someone to react to something crazy. You don't see that a lot.
Yeah.
It's almost like they don't go that far.
Oh my God, thank you.
You know, so and that made me think like the default is almost below that, and it doesn't feel like they're really reacting to something crazy.
Right.
And for you to see you reacting that way, I'm like, okay, was that directed? Was that in the script? Or is this you saying, because I've seen you even react in a similar realistic way that I don't usually see in the Black Mirror episode. Like when you get those texts of the pictures, I'm just wondering like that. I just am so happy to see that kind of realistic work, even in a big kind of comedy, because it just talk about that a little bit as a way to enter into your thought process of that kind of performance.
I mean, first of all, thank you very much for that. You know, with that type of stuff, like, and again, I get very nervous because I don't want to sound like pretentious or like, you know, but I do believe that like you have to ground everything. That I think that like some of my least favorite stuff to watch is like a performance that comments on what it's about.
Yes.
And I think that the things that I'm drawn to, like the types of performances that I'm really drawn to are always things where regardless of the situation, they're playing it as that it's completely real because it is completely real for that character. So like if we're just going to show up and be like, oh, isn't this crazy? Blah, like, well, why am I asking you to sit there and watch it?
Yes.
Like, you know, and I think that that's also how we care about these characters and how our hearts open to them is that like, also that's one of my favorite things about this movie is that like this woman is, you watch her go through this like harrowing ordeal that like, while it's very sci-fi and like, you know, would be awful, it'd be horrible. And I'm very interested in both the comedy and the drama of that.
Yes.
If it was just played as like a joke, then why are we all here?
That's right.
But I mean, I think that it goes back to that thing earlier too, like something I really try to keep in mind with everyone that I play is that like I do try to treat them with the same amount of respect and care as I would if I were playing like Janis Joplin, just because you happen to know who Janis Joplin is.
Mm.
Right? Like you guys don't happen to know who Sarah is, but I know who she is. And I want to like give her the proper care. I don't know how else to say it.
And it also seems like having that framework in your mind about it being like a biopic of this person you haven't heard yet, like really just sets you into a place of reverence for the person you're playing. It's not just like, you know, a segment on the news about somebody. This is worthy enough for a biopic.
Yeah, that like, you know, everyone's the star of their own biopic.
Yes.
You know, think about how you would want your life story to be told.
Yes.
Or portrayed in a movie. And I mean, it may sound like woo-woo and crazy, but like, I don't know, I do think of these characters as like people. To me,
yes.
They are. I spend as much time with them as I would a person, and I get very passionate about it and very defensive for them. And I think about their lives and I, you know, want to give them, I want to do them justice. And that's like a huge thing for me.
This might be the secret why we like you. What is your assessment of this whole lockdown time? You're the first singer I've talked to, I think, on this podcast since lockdown. Somebody whose music is a part of life. I feel so terrible for theater people during this time. I feel like the singers, it's the last art that's going to come back, maybe. Like, I think we'll be in a movie theater before we go and see a live performance. But how is your artist, your inner artist, doing in this time?
Well, it's like a tricky one to answer, because I think I'm mostly just so grateful for how privileged I am during this time. Like, I am healthy and I am safe, and I'm like in a house in Los Angeles that belongs to my friends. And, you know, I think I'm so overwhelmed with that it's like I'm not very in touch with like what the, you know, quote unquote like artist in me wants right now. I mean, I was in the middle of a TV show that I was loving filming, and I miss acting. I miss acting a lot, for sure. And I'm very eager to, you know, that's like another character that I've really loved. And I would, you know, love to be back on set doing that and playing her. And it's with this cast is so great. And I really miss it. But in terms of, I don't know, like I'm playing, I have a keyboard here and I'm playing that sometimes, but I think, yeah, I haven't really been too in touch with that part of myself, maybe because it's a little like self-protecting, because I don't know when anything's coming back, you know? Like, you know, we keep being told that maybe sets will be back up in the fall, but with each passing day, I'm like, in what world?
Mm.
What world are we going to have 200 people on an enclosed set for 16 hours a day?
Yeah.
There's no way.
No.
And, you know, what matters the most here is that people are safe and that people are healthy. And, you know, like, how else can you ensure that aside from having a vaccine? As much as I would like love for that to not be the case, as much as I would love for them to find a way where we can all do it safely, I think that that's wishful thinking. So I don't know. Anyway, to answer your question, maybe I'm not entirely in touch with that part of myself, because it's like a defense mechanism for thinking about like just how long it might be until, you know, we get to do it again.
I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah.
Once this Palm Springs lands and we're watching it at home, or maybe even eventually somewhere in theaters, I think you're going to be inundated with scripts.
Oh, thanks.
So I mean,
that would be lovely. I'll take that.
And is it true that you've turned down a lot of things?
Yes, I have.
So you're going to be turning down more things.
You know, I want to preface that also though by saying, like, I'm again like wildly privileged and lucky to be in a position where I am able to turn things down, and it was not like that for a very long time. And the minute that I could sort of take up that space and, you know, and choose the power to say no, like, I don't take that lightly. You know, but yes, I have definitely, I've been conscious and selective of like what I want to be a part of. And I'm like wildly blessed to be able to do that.
Would you consider now like setting up your own company?
Yeah, it's so funny you say that. A friend of one of my best friends is a brilliant writer, and her and I made a pilot together a couple years ago for FX, and we were just having a socially distanced sit in her front yard. And I've always dreamt of that. I really enjoyed being a producer a lot. I didn't think I didn't know how that would go, and I loved it. And I have thought about that, and I should do more research on it, because I think it seems like such a wildly big thing to me, where I'm like, what does that mean, a production company? But what? That sounds like you got to get a lawyer or something. And I think that I would love to, actually. So yeah, you're like right you are. I don't know what I'm waiting for. But I would love that, because I love producing. It's just so like wildly fulfilling.
Cristin Milioti, thank you so much.
It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of IFP, the Independent Filmmaker Project. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.